Hello and welcome to this tutorial of how to deploy MCP servers, and we will use Cloudflare to achieve this. And I have to say, I did not have any background with Cloudflare so far, but I was fascinated how easy it was. So I guess you will also like the experience that you will gain there. Let's go through what we will cover in this video. First, we have a little theory at the beginning, because I think it's important to understand what we are doing and also the underlying mechanism. Then we will grab an MCP example provided by Cloudflare that we will use throughout the whole video. We will first check it out locally, test it locally, and then we will just deploy it to Cloudflare. Then we have a look at how we can add some custom logs in there, get a little bit familiar with the dashboard, and I also show you how to can integrate it with your GitHub repository so that you have a useful pipeline in place. And at the very end, I will show you how to deal with environmental variables. Hope you enjoy. Now let's get started. So let me go through only 3 slides and then we are ready to go with the deployment. So what is the transport in MCP? The transport is the communication mechanism between the MCP clients and the servers, and it handles how messages are sent and received. And MCP uses the JSON RPC2 as its standard wire format for all the communications. And this gives us a consistent, structured way to exchange information. And there are 3 main message types you will encounter. First, we have the requests, which are sent when clients ask servers to do something, which you can see here. We have JSON RPC2 specified. We have an ID to this request, a method, so post, get, and so on, and the params. Then we have responses. So this is the answer from the server to the client back. Again, here with the ID, the same ID to the request, we have the result, and optionally also an error in case of an error. And then we have also the notification, which is only a one-way update that don't need responses, and it's only like, hey, something new happened here, so as you know, a notification. Okay, let's talk about the 3 main transport methods in MCP. First, we have stdio, or standard input-output. This is the simplest form of transport, used primarily for local communication between the processors on the same machine. Think of it like talking to someone in the same room, direct, efficient, and perfect for local development. Then we have SSE, or server sent events, which has been the standard for remote MCP connections until recently. And the challenge with SSE is that it requires 2 separate endpoints. One where the server sends updates to the client, and another where the client sends requests to the server. And it's like having a conversation with 2 phones, one for listening and the other for speaking. And this is adding complexity, making it hard to scale, and it requires keeping connection open for long periods. But now, in March 25, we've seen the introduction of streamable HTTP transport, which represents a significant improvement. And this new transport simplifies the entire communication model by just using a single HTTP endpoint for all the interactions. So with this in mind, we now have all the knowledge we need to deploy our first MCP server. Let's get started. So if you're wondering, I'm just following this great written tutorial here provided by Cloudflare how to build and deploy MCP servers. I've done this morning. I was fascinating how easy it was to deploy it, and then it just works. Okay, so let me get rid of this, open up your favorite IDE, and I would say let's get started. The first thing that we need to do is to clone the MCP example repository. You can all get these commands, of course, from the written tutorial. I will now paste it in here. So npm create Cloudflare at latest my-mcp server, and then here we choose as a template the remote MCP offless, so without authentication. So authentication is not in the scope of this video. We are primarily very focused on the deployment. And now let's wait. We can see here now all the steps: cloning, installing the dependencies, and so on. And do we want a Git control? Yes. Okay, do you want to deploy your application? No. because we will first try it out locally. Great. Now with this in place, let's navigate into this folder, cd my-mcp-server, and there we write in here mcp start to check if everything is correct. We see under the hood that the Wrangler dev is been used to open up the development state here. And now we have this here, local URL, localhost on port 8787. And we will now use the inspector, what I've also used in another tutorial of mine, to test this now out. So sorry, I'm having some problems with my keyboard. Let's press enter. Oh, okay, this is interesting. Let me fix this. Okay, great. Now we see that the inspector is here up and running at this URL. Let me move over this screen so you can see it. So I'm going back to this terminal where we started the MCP server, and I'm grabbing here this URL. We are here now in the inspector. Okay, so I will now put this URL in here. Make sure you select SSE as a protocol. And then we also need to write here /SSE. And then we can connect to our local server. And we see, listing the tools, we have now here 2 tools, add and calculate. Everything is working fine locally with the SSE protocol in place. Great. Okay, before we deploy our code to Cloudflare, let's have a real quick view at the code to understand what is going on here. So the MCP example from Cloudflare is structured in 2 big parts. The first part is here the MCP server definition, and then here this part we define how we can invoke it. Let's go through the first part. Here we actually set up the MCP server. We give it here a name and a version. Okay. And then we have here an asynchronous function calling init, and here we define our tools and also the functionality. So we see we have 2 tools here. One is calling add and the other is calculate. And then we define the request parameters with the help of SOT. So for this tool, we have 2 parameters calling A and B. These 2 are numbers. And for this tool, calculate, we have 3 request parameters. Operation, it could be an enum, so add, subtract, multiply, divide, and also 2 numbers A and B. And then we have here the last part of this definition is the actual implementation code. So what is then happening? And here we see it in a really good way. First, we need to understand what kind of operation we need to do. So therefore we use a switch. And in the pending case, add, for example, we add it. In case of subtract, we sub it, and so on. And then finally return it. So this is the first part. And then the second part here, this has nothing to do with MCP at all. This comes from Cloudflare. And here we set up our endpoint, or you can also compare it with a controller. And this has only one job, taking in the request and then deciding what to do further. And if we hit our controller with the endpoint SSE, it respects that and also then is serving our MCP with the SSE protocol. But the guys from Cloudflare were so smart and also considered the new protocol that I showed you, the streamable HTTP. And so if you hit it with the endpoint of /MCP, then your MCP server will be using the new streamable HTTP protocol. And you can see it here, because it will be then serve my-mcp serve and not serve SSE. It doesn't matter what kind of protocol, the invocation is the same. So we have the request that comes from the outside. So I guess this visualization is great for showing this. So the request comes from the outside. And if you hit it then with the /SSE, this Cloudflare worker fetch functionality, also our controller will then call your server with the help of the SSE protocol. Okay. And in there we inject the request that comes from the outside, also the environment variables and the context that's already there. But if you hit it from the outside with /MCP, it will then be using the new streamable HTTP protocol. And if nothing is found, so if you just maybe then hit there with slash, only with slash, then you will get back not found with the status of 404. That's the whole logic in there. And I guess it's important to understand that further if we will make some modification to the code, that we now have a basic understanding of how this MCP example works. So let's get started now with the deployment. Okay, so the next part is that we use here the Wrangler CLI to deploy our MCP server to Cloudflare. But at the moment when you start out, your terminal has no real connection to the remote Cloudflare. And we need to first establish this connection between your terminal and Cloudflare. So, because otherwise, if you will run this command the first time, it will give you some kind of error description that you're not registered or it's not found, something like that. And what I can encourage you to do is first go to Cloudflare, make sure you register, and then that you have like this view after login, so this dashboard. Then go here to compute and workers and pages, and we will start with the hello world example. So click in here, it doesn't matter, we just click the deploy. The background is that we need to create for ourselves, for our account, workers subdomain. You see it here, Johannes workers.dev, and this is important because if you don't have a workers subdomain, you cannot deploy your MCP server because by default, Cloudflare is looking for this subdomain of yours and then deploy it there. And with this simple hello project, we've now created a worker subdomain that we can now leverage for our MCP server. Okay, make sure you register yourself, register you deployed a simple hello world worker so that we have the workers subdomain. Great. Now let's move over to our MCP example, and in that folder we will run this command here, mpx wrangler at latest, and then deploy. So here on my side, since I'm already logged in, we see it's packaging up and then also like here uploading it. And then we have here our deployed MCP workers subdomain, right? But for you, you first need to follow a link, make sure you sign in then there, and then try it again. And then with the second time, you should have a similar result. And if we now hover back here to workers and pages, we should see now our simple hello worker and then also our my-mcp server here. Okay, so if it's like the first time for you, you will not see much there here in the dashboard since I've already deployed it multiple times. We see here quite some requests, sub requests, and so on. We see also then here the deployments. So only 3 minutes ago, my first deployment. But I guess somehow, because I'm using the same name stored in some other object than my previous invocations, and therefore I have only like one deployment, but all my history data in there. Okay, anyway, now we have deployed our server, let's test it, and therefore we will open up again another instance of VS Code. And what we will now do is we will navigate to the JSON path of our Claude Desktop, where we will configure this as a MCP server. So I go here to File, and then I open Reset, and then here you see a library, application support, Claude, and then Claude Desktop config JSON. This is what we need, and this is the default path if you're on Mac. And so let's open up this, and I've already prepared here the MCP server for us. So I will also put this into the description, but yeah, we just added here to our MCP servers. Let's call this then maybe my-mcp-remote-server for the sake of the demonstration. And then we started up this command with mpx, and then the arguments are MCP remote. And here we now need to grab our subdomain that we got here from this terminal. Okay, so let's make over that you copy this. And then we go in here and put it in there. And also make sure with /SSE. Okay, also if you want to use the new protocol, of course, you can use /MCP. It's up to you. Let's go for SSE. And then make sure you have now this correctly added here in this JSON and then save it. And now we will start Claude Desktop to see if we can use now our deployed MCP server. Okay, my GitHub MCP server is failing, but this is fine. And if we now click here, where is it with the new UI? Let's see, maybe connected apps, not in here. Was it in here? Yes. So we see that our my-mcp-remote-server is connected and online, and we can use add and calculate. So let's do this. Please use my remote server to make a calculation of, let's say, 10 plus 15. Yep, and now Claude would like to use an external integration, my-mcp-remote-server. Let's allow it. And then we have here our result. And now let's jump back over here to the dashboard, refresh it, and then you should see a new request coming up and investigate it further. If you go here to the logs, and then I would filter it, we should then see it. So this today is this date here. If I open up this, we don't see that much, only that it was like invoked. And now we come to the second part where I will show you how you can use some basic logging to better understand the application logic itself, because here all this stuff is like infrastructure logs that comes from Cloudflare. Okay, it was invoked, stuff like that. But inside of that, we don't have that much information what is going on. So we will go over here and then edit our code and just make a simple console log in here where we put out the operation and the numbers, and then maybe at the end, before we returning the result, also logging the result. Great, and then we save it, and I can use the deploy command with the Wrangler CLI to deploy the new version with our console logging. Okay, we see that our second deployment was also successful. And now let's try out if we would see our custom console logs. Therefore, I will hit here another operation. Okay, great. And then we see here the result. And now let's head over here to the logs. And now let's go here to add filter, to the queries. And then we choose this one, application logs. And then we would see here, application logs. Let's open this up. Okay, no logs in here. Where is it? Okay, wait. So we go to queries, application logs. And now there should be our logs. Maybe let's use the search here to find it. No. Okay, now I know it. Sorry, so if we just also click here on live, make sure you selected the application query. And now I will trigger it again. So I will use the same prompt here. And then hopefully we should see it here in real time, our logs. Yep, we see now here RCP, the fetch, but no custom logs are here. Now we see it. And now we see here the operation multiply, we see the number, the result. Yeah, that's what I wanted to show you in this part so that you have a better understanding to differentiate between the invocation logs and also about the application logs. Then use the query with the application log and also the live state to capture it in a live state. Okay, we've come to the last section of this video, but before we continue, I need to give you this really important information. So let me read this out loud. It's recommended to run production workers on a workers route or custom domain rather than on your workers dev subdomain. Your workers dev subdomain is treated as a free website and it's intended for personal or hobby projects that aren't business critical. So remember this. If you successfully deployed your MCP server, make sure you move it on a domain that is a workers route or custom domain. Great, now let's go over to deal with the environment variables. And therefore, we go to another part of the documentation. Here we see how we can deal with this information. And here it's also written environment variables are available on the env parameter passed to your workers fetch event handler. If we have a look here on my little drawing, we see that the env variable is available here in the context of the Cloudflare worker fetch, but not on the MCP server. So we need a way to actually move this information and pass it down to our MCP server. So let me show you how we can pass down that information from the Cloudflare worker to our MCP server. We see here the fetch function with the request, the environmental and the execution, right? And what we are doing here at line 77 and 81 regarding of the protocol that we are requesting from the outside, we create a new instance of that class of my-mcp and we inject the whole fetch function into this new instance. So we injecting the request, the environmental and the context to our instance of the class. And what we then can do is to easily access this by doing this. So I've created here a new console log and then I'm just saying hey, this and db URL, and now we get a little TypeScript error here because we are not aware of this object. But what we can do is we can easily create a global interface here at the top where we can specify of all our keys in our environment, and then we easily apply that here to our MCP agent with this approach here. And now we introduced here our environmental and the keys, and now you see everything is looking fine. This is only one part, and the other part is of course to now create and provide the value of this stuff here. And there are two ways. The one way is to provide that information over the dashboard. And the better way I will show you now is if we go here to the Wrangler JSON. So the Wrangler JSON is just a configuration object for our worker. And if you scroll further down here, you also see a section of the environmental variables. So let's comment this out. And also make here a comma, so it's a valid JSON again. And here we specify now our environmental value. So db URL is a key and value just some random dummy data. And this is all we now need to do. And now let's commit and push the code and we will see the changes then. So we move over here to the deployments and then let's visit the last one, the recent one, click here on view build. And if we scroll down here at the terminal, we also see from the logs that our db URL is perfectly aligned in the environmental context, so at runtime. So we see this is a proof for yourself to check if the value is there. And now we should also see it in the logs. So let's go for logs, queries, application logs. hit live, and I will now trigger another test case. So let's calculate this stuff here. And now let's click on here on the message, and we see, wow, our DB URL variable is here. So make sure you hit the subscribe button, because I'm preparing a huge MCP course and I don't want you to miss this out. If you have any questions, of course, just write it down in the comments. Thank you for watching, and I see you in the next one.